The pill that almost put me out of the way had my name on it in my brother's handwriting. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday, a day like any other except for the weight in the air that I couldn't name at the time. I took my evening meds, the same routine I'd followed since my heart surgery last year, and settled into my favorite chair in the living room. The TV murmured in the background. The lamp cast its usual warm light, and then, without warning, something shifted. At first, it was subtle. A strange warmth in my head, a heaviness in my arms. Then my vision narrowed, the edges of the room fading into shadow. Breathing suddenly felt like work, as if the air had thickened. My heart didn't race, it didn't pound, it slowed. The world became distant. The next thing I knew, I was staring up at a hospital ceiling. The light above me buzzed faintly. A nurse stood at my side, saying my name softly, almost testing if it still belonged to me. The doctor called it a bad reaction, a simple mix-up, the kind of thing that just happens sometimes. But when the pharmacist came to talk to me, her tone didn't match his casual shrug. "We ran the pills," she said, keeping her voice low. "One of them isn't what it's supposed to be." She didn't say more. She didn't need to. When I returned home the next day, I went straight to the kitchen. There, in my pill tray, was the unmarked amber bottle. The same one my brother Andrew had been helping me with since the surgery. He'd insisted on taking over that task. Said it made things easier for me, less to worry about. That night, I remembered something. The small security camera I'd installed in the kitchen years ago, after a string of break-ins in the neighborhood. I'd stopped checking it long ago, but the footage was still there. I scrolled back, my finger hovering over the timeline, and then I saw it. 3 nights earlier, while I was asleep in my chair, Andrew had let himself in with the spare key I'd given him decades ago. He moved slowly, deliberately, pulling my pill bottle toward him. From his pocket, he took a small funnel. He poured something from another container into the bottle, then shook it gently. His face never wavered. I watched the clip twice. No sound, no hesitation, just the quiet precision of a man who believed no one would ever see. It wasn't the first time Andrew had dressed ambition as concern, but it would be the last time I mistook it for love. I pulled an old leather notebook from my desk. On the first line, I wrote, "He made the first move." On the second, "Winter will be long," because this wasn't going to be quick. And it wasn't going to be loud. This was going to be deliberate. Andrew showed up the next morning, carrying a plastic container of soup and a face painted with worry. He let himself in without knocking, as if the key gave him the right to walk through my life uninvited. "I heard you had a scare," he said, setting the soup on the counter like a peace offering. "Thought I'd check in, make sure you're all right." I thanked him, keeping my voice even. My pulse stayed steady, but not from calm, from control. He moved around the kitchen, adjusting the blinds, glancing at the calendar on the wall. Then, almost casually, he said, "You know, just in case something like this happens again, it might be smart to have someone handle things for you. Temporarily, of course. Power of attorney, maybe, just for a while." "Just for a while?" I repeated, letting the words roll around in my mouth. "Exactly. For your protection." He smiled, but his eyes were measuring me. I made him coffee, watched how he didn't drink it. Andrew's the kind of man who talks not to fill silence, but to probe it, to see where the cracks are. He thinks kindness is a key, and he thinks I'm the kind of lock that opens easily. I asked about his work. He brushed it off. "Slow month." I asked about his kids. He changed the subject. Every answer was just a pivot back to me, my health, my needs. When he left, I watched from the window as he walked to his car. No rush, no guilt in his step. He believed he'd planted the idea. As soon as he drove off, I opened the notebook. Step 2. Let him think I'm weaker than I am. I started small, walking a bit slower when he visited, letting him carry the groceries I didn't need help with, forgetting small details in conversation. Details I could recite backward if I wanted. Andrew's ego is a net. If you pretend to struggle, he pulls tighter. Meanwhile, I made copies of the video. One went into a safe deposit box downtown. Another to an old friend of mine, a lawyer who still owed me a favor. I didn't tell him what to do with it yet. That time would come. 3 days later, Andrew was back. This time with papers in an envelope. He didn't say what they were at first. Just slid them across the table like a dealer offering a hand you couldn't refuse. Just the basics, he said. In case, something unexpected happens again. I didn't touch them. I didn't have to. His hands stayed there, holding the envelope, waiting. I let the silence stretch until it bent. Finally, I said, "Leave them here. I'll look them over." He smiled again, that same measured smile, and stood to go. The moment the door closed, I picked up the envelope. Inside were power of attorney papers already filled in. All that was missing was my signature. I set them on the counter beside the amber bottle. 2 artifacts of the same plan. And I decided I was going to keep them both. I didn't sign the papers. I didn't throw them away either. They stayed on my desk, right where Andrew left them. A lure on the water. When you've known someone for 60 years, you learn their tells. Andrew can't resist checking on his bait. A week later, he came by again, unannounced as usual. His eyes went to the desk before they went to me. The envelope was still there, untouched. "Haven't had a chance to look those over?" he asked, too casually. "I've been meaning to," I said, adjusting my reading glasses like the print might be too small for me now. "These things take time." "Of course," he said, but I could see the flicker of irritation behind his smile. I offered him lunch. He declined. He was restless, pacing the kitchen like a man waiting for the right moment to push. Instead, he glanced at the pill tray, my pill tray, and said, "Need me to refill these for you?" I almost laughed. Instead, I said, "That would be helpful." He opened the cabinet, pulling down the bottles like he owned them. His hands moved quickly, confidently. I stood at the counter, watching every movement without saying a word. That night, after he left, I checked the footage again. He hadn't touched the amber bottle this time. Maybe he thought one adjustment was enough. Or maybe he was saving that move for later. Either way, I knew he'd taken the bait. The next morning, I drove to see David, my old colleague from the hospital days. He'd gone into medical legal consulting after retirement, and I trusted him more than most. I told him what I suspected, showed him the footage, and slid the envelope across his desk. "Don't sign," he said immediately. "I wasn't planning to," I replied. He leaned back, tapping his pen. "You could take this to the police now." "I could," I said, "but I'd rather let him think he's winning." David understood. He'd seen enough patients who thought they could outsmart their own doctors to know the value of patience. We drew up a plan. Nothing illegal. Nothing that could be twisted against me. Every step would be slow, deliberate, documented. Over the next 2 weeks, I started changing small things. I rerouted my bank accounts into a trust Andrew couldn't touch. I moved the deed to my house into a separate holding company. And I didn't hide any of it. If Andrew was snooping, and I knew he was, I wanted him to think I was just reorganizing in preparation for signing his papers. When he came over next, he spotted the new bank statements on the counter. "Getting your finances in order?" he asked, trying to keep it light. I looked him in the eye. "Just making sure everything's tidy before winter." He didn't know what I meant. Not yet, but he would. By December, Andrew was circling more often. He never stayed long, just enough to check in and gauge whether his plan was taking root. I made sure he saw exactly what I wanted him to see. A man slowing down. A man leaning more on others. Some days I'd leave a cane by the door even though my legs worked just fine. Other days, I'd let unopened mail pile up in plain sight. Andrew noticed everything. One cold afternoon, he brought over a stack of magazines and set them neatly on my coffee table. "Thought you might like something to read. Keep the mind sharp." I smiled, playing along. "Always thinking ahead, aren't you?" He grinned. "Someone has to." He didn't know that I was thinking further ahead than he ever would. That evening, I called David. "It's time for step 3, I said. Step 3 was simple. Make Andrew believe he was indispensable. I started asking him for help with small financial matters. Paying a bill online. Reviewing a letter from the bank. Each time, I'd watch him carefully, noting how his confidence swelled just a little more. And each time, I gave him just enough information to make him think he was close to taking control, but never enough to actually touch anything important. One Saturday, he came by with an envelope in his hand. "These are just a few updated forms," he said, sliding it across the table like a gambler doubling down. I didn't open it. I just tapped the first envelope, the original power of attorney papers, still sitting on the desk. "I haven't even finished looking at these yet," I said. He chuckled. "Well, maybe you can do them both at once." I nodded slowly as if considering it. "Maybe I can." That night, I opened the second envelope. This time, it wasn't just power of attorney. It was paperwork that would give him joint access to my primary bank account, the one with more than enough to tempt him into dropping the act altogether. I smiled. This was exactly what I needed. A paper trail in his own handwriting, showing just how far he was willing to go before I even signed a thing. The following week, I made sure to accidentally leave that envelope out on the kitchen counter when my neighbor, Linda, came over for tea. I didn't have to say a word. She saw the forms, saw Andrew's name, and asked about them. I gave her a vague answer. I knew she'd mention it in passing the next time she saw him. Sometimes you don't have to set a trap. You just have to let people's own words catch them. By Christmas, Andrew was certain I was almost ready to hand him the keys to everything. And I was certain he'd already walked into a cage he didn't know was there. The week after Christmas, Andrew showed up with a smile too wide to be sincere. He brought a box of pastries from the bakery downtown, the expensive kind he only buys when he wants something. "Thought we could celebrate the new year early," he said, setting the box on the counter. I poured coffee, letting the smell of cinnamon and sugar fill the kitchen. "What are we celebrating?" I asked. He shrugged. "Fresh starts. New beginnings." His eyes flicked toward the desk where both envelopes sat in plain sight. I didn't move them. I didn't even glance at them. Instead, I talked about the weather, my neighbor's broken fence, the old maple tree in the backyard. Small things. Things that made him restless. After coffee, he leaned back in his chair. "So, have you decided yet? About the papers?" "I'm still thinking," I said. "It's a big decision." He gave me that slow nod of his, the one he uses when he thinks he's got the upper hand. "Take your time. Just don't wait too long. You never know what might happen." The words hung in the air. That was the closest he'd come to saying out loud what I already knew. And I wanted him to keep talking. So I told him about a bad dream I'd had. How in the dream, I woke up in a hospital bed with no memory of how I got there. How my finances were suddenly in someone else's hands. He smiled like it was a joke. "Sounds like a nightmare," he said. "It was." I agreed, meeting his eyes. That night I made my move. I called my bank and asked them to send me a fresh set of statements for every account. Not to my house, but to David's office. I also moved a significant sum into a separate account Andrew didn't know existed. Then I called Linda, my neighbor. "If Andrew ever comes by when I'm not home, could you let me know?" She agreed without hesitation. 2 days later, she called. "He was here this morning," she said. "Said he was dropping off some soup, but I saw him head straight for your kitchen. When I got home, nothing looked out of place. But the amber bottle was back in the pill tray, a little fuller than it had been. I didn't touch it. Instead, I put on gloves, dropped it into a plastic bag, and drove it straight to David. "Have it tested," I said. If the results came back the way I expected, Andrew wouldn't just lose his shot at my estate. He'd lose his freedom. But I wasn't ready to end this yet. Not until he'd walked himself all the way into the corner. The lab results came back 3 days later. David slid the report across his desk without a word. It wasn't what the prescription label claimed. Not even close. I read the paper twice, letting the silence fill the space between us. It wasn't enough to take to the police just yet. Not the way I wanted this to play out. I didn't just want Andrew caught. I wanted him exposed. I wanted everyone he charmed, everyone he fooled, to see exactly who he was when no one was watching. "That bottle stays with me," David said, locking it in his desk. We'll keep the chain of custody clean. Good, I said, because he's not done yet. Over the next week, I turned up the act. I started leaving my front door unlocked when I knew he was due for a visit. I left bank statements on the counter, old ones with numbers that would make his mouth water. I even left a small safe in the living room, the kind you could carry if you were determined enough. Inside, nothing but an expired passport and a pocket Bible. He noticed all of it. One afternoon, he brought me lunch and stayed to help with my mail. I let him open the envelopes, pretending I couldn't find my reading glasses. His hands lingered a little too long on the bank mail. I pretended not to see. Anything important? I asked. Just the usual, he said, sliding it back into the stack. That night, I checked the camera footage. He'd palmed one of the envelopes, slid it into his coat pocket, and walked out like it was nothing. I smiled. The next morning, I called Linda. How's your schedule this week? I asked. I might need a witness. 2 days later, we staged it. Linda accidentally stopped by while Andrew was visiting. I made a show of telling him I'd finally decided to sign the papers. Just needed to go over a few last details with him tomorrow. He left that afternoon looking like a man who'd already won. That night, I moved everything of actual value, documents, account info, even the deed to my house, into David's office. What was left in my home was nothing more than props. Tomorrow, I'd give Andrew exactly what he wanted. And I'd be holding the one thing he couldn't prepare for. A witness who saw everything. The next morning, I made sure the stage was set. The desk was cleared except for the 2 envelopes. A pen sat neatly beside them. The kitchen was spotless, blinds half open so the winter light fell directly on the papers. At exactly 10 a.m., Andrew arrived, right on time. He was wearing his good coat, the one he uses for church and business meetings. He brought a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Well, he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. I guess today's the day. I nodded slowly, like I'd wrestled with the decision all night. Yes, but I want to make sure everything is clear first. No problem, he said, sitting at the table. He opened the envelope and started explaining each page as if I couldn't read it myself. His voice was calm, patient, too patient. Halfway through, the doorbell rang. I stood. That'll be Linda, I said casually. He looked up sharply. Linda. She's here to witness. I figured it's smart to have a neutral party. He didn't like that. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened, but he forced a smile. Sure, that's fine. Linda came in, greeting us warmly, and sat opposite him. I handed her a cup of tea, then returned to my chair. Andrew pushed the pen toward me. Whenever you're ready. I picked it up, holding it above the paper, then paused. You know, I had the strangest thing happen the other day. That amber bottle in my pill tray, the one you've been helping me with, I had it tested. He froze, the pen still between us. Turns out, I continued, it wasn't what the label said it was. Not even close. Linda's eyes widened slightly. She said nothing, just sipped her tea. Andrew tried to recover. Maybe the pharmacy made a mistake. Funny, I interrupted. Because the pharmacy keeps a record of every prescription, and the footage from my kitchen camera doesn't show the pharmacy. His face drained of color. I leaned forward. Before you say anything, remember, you're not just talking to me. You're talking to a witness, and the file isn't here. It's already in safe hands. For the first time in months, Andrew had no smile, no rehearsed words, just silence. I pushed the papers back toward him. Take these. I'm not signing. Not now. Not ever. Linda stood, the air in the room thick with what wasn't being said. I think I'll be going, she said, her eyes locked on Andrew. He left without another word. But I knew this wasn't over, because men like Andrew don't walk away. They circle back. And I was ready for that. For the next 2 weeks, Andrew vanished. No calls, no visits, not even a text. It was the longest stretch of silence between us in years. I knew what that meant. He wasn't gone, he was regrouping. Linda dropped by one afternoon with a pie. Haven't seen your brother's car lately? She said, her tone casual but her eyes curious. He's keeping his distance, I replied. But not for long. Sure enough, the following Monday, I spotted him across the street, parked in his car, pretending to scroll through his phone. He didn't come up to the door. He was just watching. I went about my day as if nothing had changed. But inside, I knew he was waiting for a sign of weakness, something that told him he could push again. On Thursday, he finally showed up at my door, wearing that same too-wide smile. Thought I'd stop by. Haven't seen you in a while. Come in, I said, stepping aside. We sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where I'd refused to sign his papers. He talked about family, about the weather, about the price of groceries. Everything except what we both knew was hanging in the air. Eventually, he leaned back and said, "You know, I've been thinking. Maybe I came on too strong. Maybe we could find a middle ground." I let him talk. He spun a new version of the plan, one where I kept more control, but he still had access to help manage things. It was a softer approach, less direct, but the end goal hadn't changed. When he left, I wrote one line in my notebook. He's trying the back door now. That night, I called David. Time to move to the final stage, I said. We drafted a formal letter, nothing emotional, just facts. The altered medication, the camera footage, the test results, and the names of two people who'd seen or heard enough to connect the dots. Linda and David himself. It wasn't for the police. Not yet. This was for Andrew. The next time he came over, I'd put that letter in his hands. And I'd make sure he understood that I wasn't afraid of him. Not now, not ever. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't ruining someone in secret. It's letting them know you could. And then watching what they do with that fear. I didn't have to wait long. Saturday morning, Andrew knocked instead of letting himself in. That alone told me he was trying to read the temperature before stepping inside. "Got a minute?" he asked, his tone lighter than it had been in months. "Of course," I said, motioning him to the table. I had the letter ready, folded neatly in an envelope. No labels, no threats written on the outside, just plain paper, almost innocent. He sat, eyes darting briefly toward my pill tray before settling back on me. I slid the envelope across the table. "What's this?" he asked. "Something I think you should read," I replied. "In private." He opened it right there. His eyes scanned the first few lines, and the smile began to fade. By the time he reached the part about the test results, the camera footage, and the witness statements, his face was pale. "You're blowing this way out of proportion," he said finally, pushing the letter back toward me. "No," I said calmly, sliding it right back. "I'm giving you a chance. That's more than you gave me." He sat there, gripping the envelope, knuckles white. "What exactly are you planning to do with this?" "That depends," I said. "You could walk away, stay away, and this never sees the inside of a courtroom. Or you could keep circling, keep pushing, and I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what you've been doing." For the first time, Andrew didn't argue. He didn't try to charm his way out. He just sat there, silent. When he finally stood, he didn't look at me. "You think you're clever," he muttered, stuffing the envelope into his coat. "I don't think," I said. "I know." He left without finishing his coffee. I watched him walk down the driveway, his shoulders tight, his pace quick. For a moment, I thought that might be the end of it. But with Andrew, there's never a clean ending. So I kept the original copy of that letter locked away, untouched. And I kept watching, because predators don't retire. They wait, and I was ready for the last move. It took 3 weeks for Andrew to make his last move. It was a Tuesday evening, just after dark. I'd left the blinds open in the living room, a deliberate choice. The soft glow of the lamp spilled onto the snow outside, and I knew it made the house look warm, inviting, unguarded. At 8:17 p.m., I saw his reflection in the glass before I heard the door open. No knock this time. He stepped inside like a shadow, quiet but certain. "Forgot my key," he said, holding it up with a small smile, as if that explained everything. I didn't move from my chair. "You've had that key for years," I said. "Never lost it before." He shrugged and walked toward the desk, pretending to glance at the stack of mail. His eyes were searching for something, papers, statements, anything of value. I let him look. I even let him pick up one of the old bank envelopes I'd left there on purpose. "That one's from last year," I said evenly. "Nothing worth reading." He froze. The tone must have landed because he set it back down slowly. Then I stood, walking to the cabinet in the corner. From inside, I pulled a manila folder and set it on the table. "This is the original," I said. "The letter you read. Copies went to David, Linda, and one more person you don't know. You can guess what happens if anything unexpected happens to me." Andrew stared at the folder. His jaw flexed, but he didn't speak. "This is where it ends," I told him. "You walk away now, and this never sees the light of day. You come back, even once, and I'll make sure it's the only thing anyone remembers about you." For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then he turned, walked to the door, and left without a word. I stood at the window, watching his taillights disappear down the street. The house was quiet again. Later that night, I took the old amber bottle from the safe where I'd kept it. I turned it over in my hand once, then placed it back in its bag. Not as evidence, I had enough of that already, but as a reminder. Some battles you win in court. Others you win by making sure the other person knows you could destroy them, and choosing not to. Andrew hadn't gotten what he came for, but I'd gotten exactly what I wanted. Peace, and the certainty that if he ever stepped foot on my porch again, the cage door would slam shut. For good.